The most expensive painting ever sold by a woman is Frida Kahlo's The Dream. It sold for $54.7 million. Sounds like a fortune. Until you look at the price of Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi, which sold for $450.3 million. That isn't a gap. That is a canyon. In the ultra-elite stratosphere of art, the top 0.03% where billionaires play, and history is priced, women don't just lag, they vanish. When you count the number of women who have ever broken the $100 million mark, the number is 0. Now before you think you know exactly where this is going, stop, because the most brutal, unfiltered explanation for this gap didn't come from a conservative old boys club. It came from a radical feminist. A bisexual, atheist, pro-pornography dissident, kicked out of more universities than most people ever attend. Her name is Camille Paglia, and what she wrote in a 700-page manifesto that publishers were terrified to touch for 7 years didn't just explain the gap, it detonated the entire conversation. Sexual Personae was rejected by every major publisher in New York. 7 years, identical letters, brilliant, but impossible to publish. Because the argument inside didn't fit any political tribe. Conservatives couldn't claim it because it celebrated transgression and pagan violence. Progressives couldn't claim it because it argued that nature, not society, was the deepest force shaping human behavior, and academic feminists despised it completely because it confirmed the thing they had spent decades trying to erase, that men and women are not the same, not culturally, not psychologically, not biologically. And that this difference is written into the greatest art ever made. To understand why her book terrified publishers, you have to look at how she views human nature. And to do that, you have to start where she starts. She starts not in a gallery, but in a swamp. Paglia describes nature not as the gentle force that Romanticism imagined, but as something cold, something predatory, something with absolutely no interest in you whatsoever. Right now, your body is being consumed by processes you cannot stop. For example, cells dying, and bacteria feeding on living tissue. The same biological machinery that produces a newborn produces a tumor. Nature does not distinguish between creation and destruction. It does not care about beauty. It does not care about you. Not exactly what you'd put on a motivational poster. But here's the point. Western civilization, every cathedral, every marble column, every philosophical system from Plato to Kant, is a 3,000-year attempt to build a wall against that reality. A wall made of art, of mathematics, of obsessive, violent, brilliant structures constructed to pretend for just a moment that we are more than just meat. Now look at who built that wall. The Parthenon, the Sistine Chapel. The pyramids, mostly men. The official academic answer is that this is entirely explained by oppression. Women were kept out of schools, denied patronage, blocked from every room where decisions were made. Fix those barriers, and the imbalance corrects itself. Paglia looked at that and said, that's part of it, but it's not the bottom. The bottom is 2 words, Apollo and Dionysus. Apollo is reason, form, the straight line imposed violently onto chaos. Dionysus is ecstasy, nature, the body dissolving into something it cannot control. Every civilization, every mind contains both. Both are at war. And Paglia's argument is that the entire history of Western art is the story of what happens when the Apollonian mind tries to freeze the chaos, tries to make permanent what nature designed to rot. She argues this compulsion, this specific obsessive compulsion, is not equally distributed between men and women. Think about what the female body can do. It can create life, not metaphorically, actually. Paglia writes, a woman is already nature. She doesn't need to conquer it. She doesn't need to freeze time in oil paint to prove she existed, because her existence is already written into the bodies of the people who come after her. But a man's biological contribution to creation lasts approximately 11 seconds, and then he's done. No monument, no proof, no timestamp. Just a vague biological footnote that the universe files away and immediately forgets. And Paglia argues this asymmetry produces in the male psyche a specific kind of anxiety, an anxiety with no biological resolution. The only way out is to build something, to leave a mark that says, I was here, I mattered. I was not just an accident of chemistry that the universe discarded. She calls this the male protest against nature, and the Sistine Chapel is that protest. On a ceiling, in paint. Because here is what that protest actually costs. To produce the kind of work that defines Western civilization, you cannot be a balanced person. The work requires obsession, not enthusiasm, not dedication. Obsession. The state in which the goal becomes so total that every human comfort, every social bond, every signal from your body telling you to stop, becomes completely irrelevant. Michelangelo is the case study. 4 years on his back on a scaffold, sometimes 16 hours without stopping, paint dripping into his eyes. He refused to bathe. When he finally removed his boots after weeks of continuous work, the skin of his feet came off with them. He drove away everyone who tried to get close to him. He was, by every account, one of the most difficult human beings who ever lived, and by almost universal consensus, one of the greatest artists who ever lived. Paglia asks, Is this a coincidence? Or is the destruction inseparable from the achievement? And here is where she drops the line that got her quoted in every newspaper in the Western world. There is no female Mozart because there is no female Jack the Ripper. It sounds like an insult, but look closer at what she's actually saying. Mozart and Jack the Ripper have almost nothing in common. One produced music so structurally perfect, it still defines what music can be, and one committed acts so disturbing that criminologists are still arguing about the psychology 130 years later. But Paglia argues they occupy the same extreme end of a psychological spectrum, defined by one trait: cold, obsessive, antisocial detachment. The ability to lock the door, go inside the mind, and stay there, past the point where every reasonable person can see that something has gone seriously wrong. Mozart wrote the overture to Don Giovanni the night before the premiere, after the cast had already gone to bed. He died at 35, penniless, buried in an unmarked mass grave because he could not afford a private burial. He produced more lasting genius than almost any composer in history, and he could not keep himself alive or be buried gracefully. The same mechanism that produced the Jupiter Symphony was famously terrible at budgeting. Now here is where Paglia gets more interesting. She is not saying women are incapable of this state. She is saying something more specific, that women are structurally protected from it. The biological groundedness she described, the deep connection to the body, to care, to the rhythms of the social world, creates a psychological immune system, a resistance to the all-consuming obsession that destroys everything except the work. Women are less likely to reach that extreme, not because they are less intelligent, not because they are less creative, but because they are less desperate. And she argues this same immunity, the same psychological health, also functions as a ceiling, because the works that sell for $450 million were not made by healthy people. They were made by people who had nothing left to lose. Van Gogh wrote to his brother 3 months before his death, "I feel a terrible need," shall I say the word, for religion, so I go outside at night and paint the stars. He was not painting the stars because he was happy. He was painting them because something inside him was desperate, and painting was the only thing that answered it. He sold one painting in his lifetime for the equivalent of $2,000. Starry Night has never been sold at auction. It sits in the Museum of Modern Art, valued at over $100 million, made by a man who lived in an asylum, who cut off his own ear, who begged his brother every week for money to buy paint, because he had nothing left to give to anything. He had given all to his work. Paglia's answer is not satisfying. It is not clean. It doesn't flatter anyone. It says, the asymmetry is real, and the reason is not simply injustice. It is something older than injustice, something that lives in biology, in psychology, in the specific, desperate compulsion to build a wall against the dark. The dark is still out there. The wall still needs building, and the only people who ever built it were the ones who couldn't stop obsessing. Which brings us right back to that auction room, to the missing $100 million female painting. The art market today loves to preach progress. It preaches equity, representation, and correcting the sins of history. It promises that it's only a matter of time before a woman joins the elite 9-figure club. But Paglia's work forces us to ask a terrifying question. What if the market isn't broken? What if that $100 million price tag isn't a measurement of talent, or fairness, or even beauty? What if it's simply the bounty modern society pays for complete psychological destruction? The market doesn't reward balance. It rewards the monomaniacal insanity of the Apollonian mind trying to conquer death. So maybe no female artist will ever break that record. Not because women can't reach the heights of human creation, but because they are far too sane to pay the price it costs to get there.